everyone. This is Rev Brad on the Soccer Chaplains United podcast from the Touchline. Today's podcast is part of our Lessons From Lasso series, and I just wanted to take a minute to share that we're finally wrapping up this series. If you're a fan of Apple TV's Ted Lasso, you know the show ended last year, and this has been a fun series for me to do, but to be honest, I think we've explored and touched on just about all that we can in looking at the show. So, in the end, we're going to round out the series with a total of 65 different lessons drawn out from this first season. I think the show was immensely helpful because it came out in 2020, and most of the world at the time was shut up and shut in with the pandemic. And so I think it's been a great encouragement and a great joy and great fun. Now, as we've gone along, we've looked at different elements from those 10 episodes of Season 1, and I've tried to offer a chaplain's perspective on the different things that we see in the locker room, on the pitch, and beyond. Now, difficult themes like loneliness, revenge, fear, and shame, I've tried to balance those things with other themes like hope, love, friendship, belief, and faith. Now, I'm not opposed to doing more lessons from Lasso, but as the show has run its course, like I said, I have a feeling that this series has as well. But, and it's a big but, if you have a theme or a topic or a scene from an episode in seasons 2 or 3, and you'd like me to podcast and talk about it, here's where I want to invite you. Would you just share that with me? Send an email to podcast@soccerchaplainsunited.org and include the episode or maybe some of the scene information or details, maybe even a question. And depending on the responses, maybe we'll have another lesson or 2 or 3 to go through together. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this journey with me. I think there's been some great lessons that we've learned, whether you're a person of faith or not, whether you're a footballer, a manager, or simply a fan of the beautiful game, or a fan of Ted Lasso. So thanks again for joining us today, and here we go with one of our last lessons from Ted Lasso.
He's found the space, and he's found the back of the net.
Just a little off foot, thinking he's going to go far post. Not strong enough with his right hand.
Whips that one in. Far post, almost made him ends, and they have. He has the hat-trick. The second in his career. The third of the night. The hat-trick hero.
Talked about you're not going to be able to sustain that kind of pressure.
To the corner. Goes towards the near post. And you're on the angle, and what a goal! What a goal!
As soon as the show opening and credits finish, we see Captain Roy Kent enter into Coach Ted Lasso's office. The rules state you need to select a new captain, he says. And the next few minutes see Lasso and Kent go back and forth with each other until Lasso finally outwits, outlasts, and out-argues Kent that he must be the one to select the new captain to replace himself for the upcoming weekend match. Here's where Roy will be on the bench for the first time in his career, perhaps. The bit ends with Lasso pulling a magic trick with the captain's armband and Roy walking away after muttering, "This is why it's hard to love you." Lasso and Coach Beard have a moment celebrating, now knowing that Kent has some kind of love that he feels towards Lasso. Well, I've spoken about love before throughout our Lesson from Lasso series, and back in Lesson 29, we spoke about the love of a team and the Greek word and idea of storge as an expression for the love of inanimate things like a soccer team. We've also talked about the sometimes inordinate or disordered love for the game, for a person, and when those things get in the way and conflict with a love for God. We've even talked about truth-telling moments and the way in which these often are expressions where one might call, we might say it's a tough love. Today, though, I want to comment on this interaction between Kent and Lasso and expand more on tough love kind of moments. Kent, in the scene, he knows the right thing to do, but for a myriad of unknown or unclear reasons, he's reluctant to do it. Maybe it's about pride or shame or embarrassment or for some other reason, but Kent is reluctant to name the captain to take his stead. But Lasso doesn't let Kent take the easy way out. It could be very easy for him to take that burden and to name the next captain, but instead, he places that responsibility on Roy's shoulders. It reminds me of a moment that Jesus has with one of his closest friends and disciples, the disciple Peter. It's after the resurrection of Jesus, Peter and several other disciples have been out fishing late at night. And there's this miraculous catch of fish and a dinner. And Jesus, they're eating, or maybe it's after the meal, and he asks Peter a question. Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these? Now, you can read more about this exchange in the Gospel of John, chapter 21, verses 15 through 19. But essentially, to sum it up, Jesus asks Peter 3 times if he loves him. And 3 times Peter affirms that he does, to which Jesus responds, feed my lambs, feed my sheep. Now, many scholars and commentators will say they believe that this is Jesus' way of reinstating Peter after Peter has denied Jesus 3 times on the night of his trial and betrayal, and the trial that led to his crucifixion and death. Another interesting aspect to this dialogue, though, centers around the Greek words that are used for love in the exchange between Jesus and Peter. See, the first 2 times that Jesus asks this question of Peter, Jesus asks whether Peter has agape love. It's the Greek word for divine love. I've talked about it before. To each time, Peter replies that he has a phileo love, and that's a Greek word that kind of intimates a brotherly love. The final time, though, Jesus uses the phileo word, and Peter again replies, Lord, you know all things. You know that I phileo you. To me, this is extremely interesting because as John writes, Peter was hurt by being asked a question 3 different times. Maybe Peter doesn't realize what Jesus is doing. Maybe Peter's feeling that his loyalty is being questioned, or not really realizing that what the scholars are thinking, that Peter's being restored, that maybe something else is going on between him and Jesus. Well, for me, it's interesting because the Peter of the past was always overreaching. He was always punching above his weight. The question of Jesus and the responses of Peter seem to show a couple of things to me. First, Jesus isn't necessarily letting Peter off the hook for the known verbal denials. Now, to this might seem an indirect way of addressing Peter's betrayal, which in some ways was just as bad as Judas's. But Peter, likely looking back at this moment, will come to a realization that he and Jesus had to go through this hard confrontation. And in it, Peter comes to know, or he will come to know, that he still has the trust and the belief of Jesus in him. If you know the relationship, if you remember, Jesus has proclaimed that Peter's bold kind of faith was a bedrock foundation for the church. It was the kind of faith that many people, that Jesus said, I'm going to build my church on this kind of faith. The second thing is this. Peter, in his responses, I believe, shows a change in his personality. Here's this brash, braggadocious leader, and he doesn't claim to have the agape divine love for Jesus. He's seemingly, to me, more reserved. Now, maybe he's come to the realization that he cannot love Jesus with that divine, godly love on his own. But to me, there seems to be almost this acknowledgement, this acceptance of limitation. Whereas in the past, Peter never saw a ceiling. He never saw a challenge that he wasn't willing to take on. He never saw a fight he wasn't ready to jump into. And it seems that here and now, there's this tempering of his spirit, and Peter's realized it. Some of the rough edges to Peter's character and nature have been worn down by the experiences of the crucifixion and the resurrection and everything which has followed. In some ways, perhaps he's even realized he had some wrong ideas about Jesus, and maybe he's even come to realize he's had some wrong ideas about himself too. Of course, this wasn't going to be the last of Peter's refining moments. We see even shortly after this exchange, he has questions about John, the apostle to whom Jesus was closest to and loved most dearly, and who's writing this gospel. We know, too, that Peter has a run-in with the apostle Paul years later. In all of these things, there's just 2 things that I want to take away from Jesus and Peter's relationship that I see reflected in this moment between Ted Lasso and Roy Kent. First, is that there's a refining work that God is taking us all through, taking me through, and will likely be for our entire lifetime. Even as I am in my late 40s, I realize more so today that I'm further away from God's standard and ideal, and I see the refining and reworking, the transformative work that God continues to lead me through and take me through. The second thing, though, is this. God's love for me is such that I can have confidence even when I am going through that transformation and change. I've seen it in football many times, that athlete that doesn't know where exactly they stand, a manager who doesn't know if they'll ever coach another game, and an executive who isn't sure whether they'll have a job come Monday morning. There is a tension of living out the fear or reprisals for failure to perform, for failure to achieve. However, with God, I've come to know that He loves me through the failures. He loves me through the mistakes, and He's urging me forward, and there's a transformative work and process that He's committed to, regardless of my own abilities or inabilities to fulfill. Friends, maybe it's difficult to love God, as Kent says. This makes it hard to love you. Or maybe it's even difficult to receive love from God because of our experiences that we've had in this world, those moments where we've been failed or someone's let us down. Maybe the places where we play or coach or lead have let us off the hook too easily. Maybe it's not from a place of seeing us personally grow and develop, but maybe because it's just rather easier to terminate someone rather than it is to reform and work with them. Whatever the case may be for you and for me, let me reassure you. God's love for you and me is unlike any love, anything that you might experience in this world. It is a divine love. It's a love that will not forsake doing the hard thing to accomplish the hard thing. Much of this is visible in Jesus coming and dying on a cross. He didn't shirk back from the duty that He came to complete and the promise that He promised to fulfill. And I think if we can realize those truths, we can overcome any difficulty that we might feel in trying to love God. Well, thanks for listening to this lesson from Ted Lasso. This is Reb Brad coming to you from the touchline.